Good evening, everybody. The last few people are looking for a place. Good evening, everybody. And a warm welcome here at the Balie. My name is Veronica Baas. I'm a program editor here, and I will be moderating this evening, which is called People, Power, Change. And that is, of course, the title of the book by Professor Marshall Ganz, who we are very honored to have here tonight. And the subtitle of the book is called Organising for Democratic Renewal. And democratic renewal is something I think everybody in this hall will agree is something we need. But how much do you actually work towards that? I am a little bit curious. So is there anyone who has ever attended a protest? Okay, that's good. Almost everyone. Is there anyone who's ever organized a protest? Okay, good. What kind of protests have you organized?
Student protests in the 90s.
A student protest in the 90s, that's very good. Someone else?
A student protest in 2010 or something.
Good, we have multiple decades. Anyone who is a member of a union? Okay. Anyone who's a member of a political party? A political party. Almost always, yes. Active with a political party? Good, okay. Good, so we have a lot of people who are already wanting to make a change, and tonight we're going to talk about how we can do that in the most effective way, and also maybe how we can channel the anxious energy that we might have been feeling for the last year, looking at world politics into change. A brief roadmap of the evening. Sandra Bol will be introducing the evening, and then I will be talking with Professor Ganz. And then afterwards, after a little while, Jerry Afrië will join us, and then Diewertje Wallaert will join us. I will introduce them to you. And at the end, you will be able to ask questions. Sandra Bol from the Lowlander Project, she will introduce us to Marshall Ganz, but most importantly, she will tell us why he and his work matter to her. May I have a warm applause?
Thank you. And it's great to see so many people in this room, although I must say I can't really see you, but I feel that you're here. And I'm glad you're here today, that you've come in the evening, after work, maybe you've had to hurry to get here. Everybody wants to know, how do you make change possible? And we're going to listen to Marshall and listen to what he has to say about us. And we're all here together because we want to know what makes change happen. That's what binds us, our curiosity. And I assume a growing urgency to make change work. You have joined us tonight because you care, and we hope to inspire you. You can listen and be curious and leave with new insights. That's fine. But we hope that many of you will also be motivated not just to listen, but also to stand up and take leadership. Be active and take part in movements. Because people power is built by you and me, by us, and that's mainly by us, the most important part of organizing. Before we start the evening, however, I'd like to tell you something about organizing in the Netherlands and about myself. The Lowlander Project, which I work for, I'm a co-founder, is a school for organizing in the Netherlands, and I saw a few people here in the hall. I see your hands, yeah, of people who have degrees from Lowlander here, yeah, great. And we teach organizing. I teach organizing. And I'm really excited to introduce Marshall this evening. And I teach all kinds of organizing, but the thing that you can get me up in the middle of the night to teach is storytelling. And that's why I'm going to tell you a story. You see, the first time that Marshall and I collaborated, it was 1968. I was 10 years old. I don't know how old Marshall was. You see, my first experience with organizing was when my mother refused to buy green grapes until migrant workers in California were allowed to form a union. It was a big sacrifice for me. Green grapes were so yummy, so I must admit, every so often I would go to a friend's house and just sneak 1 or 2 grapes, and I would eat them, and I would feel the juice sliding down my throat, and instead of enjoying it, I would feel pangs of guilt, because I was totally committed to the struggle. While other kids at school wrote reports about turtles or their pet cats, I remember that I wrote about a migrant child who had to work instead of going to school. You see, I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. That's what's called the Rust Belt in the United States. And Marshall was active helping the migrant workers to unionize in Southern California. He wrote Why David Sometimes Wins about this period. It was our first joint collaboration and my introduction to organizing and social change. I was born to organize because organizing in the United States is as American as apple pie and baseball. In the States, people know what organizing is. In America, people have to fight for their own rights because no one else is going to do it for them. And organizing together with others, forming people power, is the most logical way to do that. I have now lived in the Netherlands for more than 40 years. I've seen 2 developments which are important to understand the difference between organizing here and organizing in the States. First of all, when I arrived here in 1983, 2 terms were dominant: pillarization and the polder model. They made organizing less necessary, although not unneeded. But by now the pillars have crumbled. Society is more diverse and more independent, individualistic. There's no one left in the ivory towers who's going to negotiate together with us, for us, to determine what's good for us and what we need. We have to do that ourselves. And that explains why there's more need for organizing, maybe more interest in organizing now than when I first came to the Netherlands. My second thought is that in the neoliberal years, the end of the 90s, the beginning of this century, a lot of NGOs grew really, really big and powerful. Thanks partially to the postcode lottery and a growing dependence on grants from government and big foundations. Just like the social services, people became consumers. Around this time, I remember that the biggest selling point of the FNV, the biggest trade union in the Netherlands, was that you could receive discounts for weekends away. It was good for me to become a member of the FNV because I could save money and have fun at the same time. Organizations professionalized and did the work of their members. Members became a wallet or a Facebook-like. I wish I had thought of that sentence myself, but I once read it in an article from Marshall. The first 5 years I lived here, I worked at IKV and then at Pax Christi. Now the organization has merged into PAX, and they have about 100 to 150 employees. In the 80s, when I worked there, each organization had 5 paid staff and a number of conscientious objectors, one of which I married. Their local groups were essential for their power base. That is no longer the case. They would like it, but it's hard to turn back the tides of neoliberalism. I worked a long time in the management team of Milieudefensie, so I understand why this happens. I did not necessarily mean it as a criticism, but it was not good for building people power, what happened in this period. And at a certain point, when the subsidies dry up and these organizations are threatened to lose their license to operate because of when the subsidies all dry up, these organizations are threatened to lose their license to operate because of the distance between them and their people has become too great. Of course, it doesn't mean that there's no organizing in the Netherlands. Jerry, for example, has been very instrumental in bringing an end to Black Pete, and he hasn't done that by himself. That's organizing. And there's a lot of organizing going on in the Netherlands, but people don't call it organizing. For example, in the town I live, there's a neighborhood group that's pushing the local government to build a playground on an abandoned lot. That's organizing. And we no longer smoke in restaurants, offices, hospitals, schools anymore. That's mainly because of organizing. The women's movement of the 70s, Baas en eigen buik, that's organizing. These examples show that there is power in numbers and that one can turn what we have into what we need in order to get what we want. That's organizing. And also not my own sentence, also from Marshall. I'm very good at listening to you, Marshall. Organizing is not a totally new concept. We already do it. But learning from Marshall and learning from organizations like Lowlander provides a common language and a common understanding. Not a new way of working, but a way to improve how we work. It teaches you something which you do even better if you know the steps. If you can strategize, if you can tell stories, build relationships, create a structure, and help people to discover their leadership potential. Marshall left California at a certain moment and went back to Harvard to finish his degree. And as far as I know, you never left, right? I think so. Now he's teaching thousands of students all over the world. He's teaching them how democracy works. He has inspired his new generations for years and years. And Joop van den Assem here is as well. He and I followed Marshall's course when we worked at Milieudefensie. 5 years ago, we quit our jobs and founded Lowlander Project. And we have handed out more than 100 organizers' diplomas since then and worked with many groups and organizations helping them to start organizing or to better organize. We are on a mission inspired by Marshall. Tonight, you will be listening to Marshall, and we hope that you will be equally inspired, that you will want to continue with your movement work. You too can gain a common language, that you will find others to work with, start maybe a new group, or continue to do what you're doing, anything that will help you get what you want with those who need it too. We are all excited that Marshall is here in the Netherlands, and I would like to start the meeting by asking a question to Marshall. But before I do that, let me tell you something about my speech, or a public narrative in organizing terms. A public narrative has 4 parts: a personal story, a call to join the community, an explanation about the problem, and a clear ask. Because organizing is mainly about building lasting relationships, you make your story personal, as specific as possible. And you give others the possibility to take part with you. I'm sure you'll speak about the role of public narratives tonight. So let me go back to my question now. 6 weeks ago, Joop and I were in the United States, and we had the honor of joining you, Marshall, in one of your lectures. As I said, I listen well. You told the students not to think for others. Don't assume people are too scared to get involved. You said their role was to encourage courage. In this time where there's so much changing so fast, where people are feeling threatened and very scared in the United States and in the Netherlands, how do you do that? How can we encourage courage in others at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra. I will definitely ask that question to Marshall Ganz. And Sandra alluded to it already, but he was in Mississippi for the civil rights movement, and he was in California to unionize the migrant farm workers. And he laid the foundation for the grassroots campaign that got President Obama elected the first time. And on top of that, he has been studying what kind of action is actually working. And he's doing that at Harvard University. Can I have a warm applause for Marshall Ganz? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is this on? Yeah. I have an uncertain relationship with microphones, so, okay.
But a certain relationship with using your voice, right? Yeah, because Sandra already started the power of storytelling. Thank you so much for being here. And I actually want to dive in right at the moment. When was the first time you were touched with that power of storytelling?
Oh boy. I wonder, I don't want to throw things off, but is there any way it could be more possible to actually see people?
Can we?
Because
yes.
the way, hey, all right, hi there, it's great. Boy, that makes a huge difference. It was a big purple kind of thing. Thank you. When did I first? Well, I think several. My father was a rabbi, my mother was a teacher, and I grew up in a narrative, in a story. I mean, the Jewish tradition, every holiday is the telling of another way. You know, they tried to get rid of us, and then we survived. So it is a narrative construct. But when I became involved in the civil rights movement, I found myself in a tradition deeply rooted in the Black church, in which there was the sources of solidarity, of courage, of readiness to take risk, of recovery from pain, were so part of the whole narrative of the community, partly a faith narrative, a cultural narrative, but that's kind of what it was. And it was not just in words, it was in song, it was in relationship, it was in other words, it was the heart of the movement. So often people focus on heads and hands, and they forget that the heart is really what moved things. When I left the South and went to work with the farm workers in California, it was not long after Vatican II, and I encountered the Mexican Catholic tradition. See, that's the problem I have with these microphones. Thank you so much for that. Okay, is it working now? Yeah.
Yes.
See, it really needs to be tied to me, I think is the best thing. Yeah, no. No, when I went to California, began to work with the farm workers, as I say, it was right after the Vatican II, and there was a very rich Mexican Catholic tradition, which was also in narrative. It was also telling stories, because storytelling is really the oldest form of discourse once we had language, because it's about something so fundamental, which is how do we deal with loss? How do we deal with the unexpected? How do we deal with that for which we're not prepared? And that's a pretty ancient question. I mean, the first rituals human beings developed were around death, because a person disappears. And so this way of trying to find words and expression that can turn threats that we fear into challenges we can embrace, that's been around for a long time. And it's why faith tradition, cultural traditions, families all teach through storytelling, because that's what it's about. And maybe I could give just one example.
Yes.
The essence of narrative is the moment. Okay. So I was with my partner at the seashore, and we were watching the sunset. It was very lovely, and it turned orange and blue. It turned orange and blue. Yes, thank you. Okay, good. Yeah, don't let go. And it was very lovely. That was moment number one. Moment number two, I was at the seashore with my partner, and we were watching the sunset, and it turned orange and blue. It was very beautiful, and it started to rain. I turned to go, but she grabbed my arm. She said, "Hey, it's only rain. As long as we're together, we're good." See, in the first moment, nothing happened. It was descriptive. In the second moment, something happened, and it wasn't an unstructured happening. There was a disruption, rain. I responded fearfully. I was getting out of there. My partner reached out to me in a spirit of support, of empathy and love, and said, "Hey, it's okay. You know, as long as we're together, it's good." And as a result, our relationship grew stronger. So there's a dynamic of a challenge, a response, a fear response, no, turned into much more of a hopeful response, and in fact, an affirmation of the value of caring, the value of love and support. That moment, that's kind of the essential core of stories, because that's what stories are about. It's what makes them happen. And because they are experiential, they teach the heart, not just the head. I don't know, maybe you've had kids, you've told stories to them, maybe, or stories were told to you, yeah? And you know, why all that storytelling? I mean, people will usually say, well, it's to instruct. Okay, well, just give them a list. Do this, don't do this, it's done, right? That really works, doesn't it? It's all to the head. The stories teach the heart. And it's that emotional connection to the values that are articulated through stories in which the power of story lives. And I'm just so grateful for having had the opportunity to, to combine my life experience with the social science I was learning in a pedagogical conversation with the future twice a week. It's kind of a cool thing. And a great way to learn and to find words, because so much of this organizing work is something everybody knows how to do implicitly. And so making it explicit then can be a key thing. And that's part of the work we've been doing with storytelling, is to enable people to articulate why they care, where they get their hope. And without that why, strategy doesn't mean anything, because it's all about how. But if you're not clear about the why, then the how is kind of lost somewhere, and you can't get to the why from the how. Is that making sense?
It does.
Yeah.
And you already touched upon it briefly when you said you joined the civil rights movement. But can you tell us a little bit more about what was, how it felt to be touched and to actually turn that feeling into action? How that worked for you?
Probably the best thing I can say is that I had gotten a scholarship to Harvard. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, which is Merle Haggard country. I don't know if folks know about country music, but anyway, probably one of the most racist cities in California. It still is. Kevin McCarthy is from there. Anyway, I was fortunate to get a scholarship, go to Harvard. It was like a whole different world. And so I was there for 2 years, took a year off, lived in Berkeley for a year. It was an important year. Went back to school when the summer of '63, Medgar Evers had been assassinated. The March on Washington happened. The 4 little girls were blown up in the church in Birmingham. And so it was kind of what was happening. And the summer project was an effort to support the work of Black organizers in Mississippi who were getting arrested or beaten or worse. And so they were looking for people to come and support, maybe people who could bring the law with them since the law was not there, which is why they recruited from elite colleges in the North, white and Black students. We were in Oxford, Ohio, at a school where we were being trained. Our job was to organize something called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was a parallel organization to the segregated Democrats, and then we'd go to the Democratic Convention, try to get them thrown out, our people seated. And there were about 300 of us there, and it was the night before it was time to go to Mississippi. And we got word that 3 of our party had disappeared. Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. They had gone a couple of days before to investigate the burning of a Black church in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and hadn't been heard from since. Bob Moses, who was the lead organizer of that, appropriately named, but Bob was a very soft-spoken guy, called us all together, and got up on the stage. He said, "We heard what happened to our brothers. We don't know exactly what happened, but we think they're gone." And sure enough, 2 months later, their bullet-riddled, beaten bodies were found buried in a dirt levee where the Klan had buried them after executing them when the county sheriff had turned them over to the Klan for that purpose. And so Bob said, look, I'd like to be able to tell you forget about it, but I can't. I have to ask you, but he said, I can't take the whole responsibility. Everybody here's got to decide. And if you can't go, you can't go. Well, it was utter silence in the room. I sank into my chair, just like everyone. You begin to ask yourself, what am I doing here? And for me, there were things. As I say, my father was a rabbi, my mother a teacher. We lived in Germany for 3 years right after the Second World War. A lot of his work was with survivors of what we now call the Holocaust. My 5th birthday party was in a camp of all children, a DP camp, which I thought was cool until I understood why. But my mom interpreted the Holocaust to me as not being simply about anti-Semitism, but about racism, and that racism kills. You turn people into objects, you can do anything with them. I don't know, do people know what a PK is? Or is that an obscure? See, I was
What is a PK?
Well, I was an RK. There's also IKs. Pastors' kids, preachers' kids. It's a sort of special deal where you have to go to all the stuff, and you're also supposed to be perfect, which is a different kind of support question. But I did love the Passover Seders, the telling of that journey from slavery to freedom, and they would point to the children and say, you were a slave in Egypt. So I've never been a slave, never been to Egypt. Until I realized that story was not about the past, it's about the present. And you had to choose. Were you with the people who were with the horses and chariots, or were you with people trying to find their way to a land of promise? And Dr. King described the civil rights movement as yet another chapter. There is another element. My father later was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. At the time, he was not available to me or to my mom. Yet every Friday night, I had to go and be the rabbi's kid. In other words, there was no real relationship there, but I had to pretend. And it got harder and harder and harder. And I think I became angrier and angrier when I was bar mitzvah at 13. After that, I didn't want anything to do with it. But what I realized was it touched me so much was that was what was going on in the South every day. You do it because I tell you to. You do it because I can tell you. That's, you must. That kind of arbitrary exercise of power was just happening all the time. And it really was pushing my button. And so, so you sort of explore what you're doing there. And in that room, we were sitting there in just complete silence. A young woman named Jean Wheeler started to sing at the back of the room. She said, they say that freedom is a constant struggle. They say freedom is a constant struggle. Oh, Lord, we've struggled so long, we must be free. Freedom costs too much dying. We've died too long, we must be free. And the next day, while she walked out of the room, everybody filed in behind her. The next day, we all went to Mississippi. And Mississippi was really a place where I discovered what would be my calling. Not only did I educate about race, power, and politics in America, not only did I learn the difference between charity and justice. Charity says, what's wrong? Let me help. Justice says, why is it happening? We must change it. And to understand the nature of change, the role of power. But for me, what really connected was this working with people to enable them to find their own sources of courage, dignity, with each other in a collective way, and in a way that could turn their resources into the power to change the conditions of their lives.
Yeah. And if you say, I learned about the nature of power, what did you learn?
Well, I think power is one of those words that's very much misunderstood. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, I don't know. In Spanish, the word is poder. It just means to be able to. But if you need what I've got more than I need what you've got, who's got the power? Let me ask again. You need what I've got more than I need what you've got. Who's got the power? And if it flips around, then who's got the power? Yeah, see, power is not something you have. It's an influence created by interdependence. And we live in an interdependent world where we're needs and resources and so forth. That's the world we live in. What matters is the terms of interdependence. Now, if it's more or less balanced, then we can collaborate to make more power with one another. But if it's out of whack and so many of the resources are here and the needs are here, then it will almost inevitably turn into domination, in which case the one with all the resources is trying to make their interest my interest and their will mine. So then you have the challenge, how do you fix that? And
how do you change your resources
how do you
into
use,
power?
How do you use the example that we all learned from was the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955. Folks have heard of Rosa Parks, a lady who one day got tired and didn't give up her seat and segregated the bus. Well, she was an organizer. The whole thing was a strategy. It took a year on this bus boycott, but they actually won. And in the course of that, this community discovered that it actually did have resources. What do you think everybody in that community would have had? Everybody. People who had been riding the bus. Huh? Yeah. What do you see when you look down? What do you see when you look down? Everybody had feet, okay? And if they used their feet to walk to work and deny the bus company the bus fare, instead of using their feet to get on the bus and give the bus company the bus fare, the bus companies, their dependence, their individual dependency on the bus was transformed into the bus company's dependency on a united community. And to me, that was organizing. That was how individual can work collectively to combine resources to shift the terms of interdependence. And that turned out to be a kind of cool thing. And it's why I was supposed to go back to school to finish my senior year. It seemed like, I wrote him a letter, how can I come back and study history when we're busy making it, which was arrogant, but also true. Instead, I went back to Bakersfield, where I grew up, and Cesar Chavez had just begun organizing migrant farm workers, mostly from Mexico, into an agricultural workers union. Now,
there you also try to change the individual independence into collective power.
That's right, and part of the value, part of the meaning of the Mississippi experience was, I grew up in the middle of that world. I hadn't seen it. I had to get what was called Mississippi Eyes. Here was another community of people of color, also without political rights, also without economic protections. California with its own rich history of racial oppression going back to the native peoples, Chinese, Japanese. So it turned out that Mississippi was not an exception to America. It was an example of the America that we needed to change. And so I began to do that work with Cesar, which was, as you said, is the same thing. It's about working with people to enable them to find their resources with each other to build the power they need. See, my mom was a teacher, but she called herself an educator. Thank you. I'm so glad you're there. I really, okay, let me try again. Yeah. Okay. How about now? I don't want to be in too intimate relationship here with this mic, but yeah. Okay.
Well, depended on it.
No, my mom was a teacher, but she called herself an educator because the word education comes from the Latin educere, which means to draw out, not to put in. In other words, it is to develop.
Wait, I will sit here. Maybe that helps also.
Oh, yeah, because there's all these people out here. And
Yeah.
Okay.
Your mom was an educator, or she called herself an educator.
Yeah, because that's what the word means, is to draw out. It's not about filling a person's head with facts and ideas or whatever. It's much more eliciting from people their capabilities. And for me, that's what organizing starts with, is that kind of development. You're not doing for, but you're doing what you can to enable people to do for themselves and with others. And that was the work in the farm workers too. And I did that for 16 years, and that's really where I learned the craft of organizing.
Yeah. And you say the power is in the relationships, mostly in the organizing.
Yeah.
they call you the architect of the Obama campaign.
It's an exaggeration, believe me.
But it was a remarkable campaign because it really put forward that the relationship, right, that the people involved in the campaign had with the people they went canvassing with. So why is that so important?
Well, a couple of things, I think, and how it relates to the campaign. So many of our interactions these days are transactions. They're not relationships. They're transactional. They're like, I give this, give that, and they're over in a moment. An example, one of my students would have interest in a conversation with another student. Okay, so they go have a cup of coffee. And then one says to the other, hey, this was interesting, let's get together again next week. Sorry, I got exams. How about the next week? I got people coming from out of town. How about the next week? Why don't I send you an email? In sociological terminology, you would have just got dumped. That's what happened. Because a relationship depends on taking the risk of a commitment to another person. And the risk of commitment then is what can become a pathway to the future, a relationship, and to trust. In other words, trust doesn't precede relationship, it grows out of relationship. And so making commitments to one another and to a larger community, that's the core power of organizing. And without that, it's so different from just mobilizing a bunch of individuals to show up at a rally, shout, and then go home, and nothing gets built. Because the basic mortar with which organization is built is relational. And I don't know if folks have had the experience of being somewhere at a party or whatever, and, ooh, I just got networked. Do you ever have that? See, somebody was just trying to extract your resource. And we know the difference between that and relationship. So that is kind of the foundation, is the starting point for this. But you had a further question after relationship. Just remind me.
I think why it was important. But in the Obama campaign.
Thank you. Yes,
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so the relational work, see, the US has a very strange electoral system, which is really a form of electoral marketing. It's not really the way we do politics, and it goes back to a Supreme Court decision in 1976 that said money was speech. And what it did was create infinite demand around elections, and that created an industry that started making millions of dollars by meeting that demand. And in the course of that, they exchange politics as people dealing with people to data points dealing with data points, to images of people, not real people, categories, labels, all that kind of stuff. Now, we had a chance in that campaign to bring back the relational ground. And it was a really precious space. And I say we because there were a number of us who really had gotten together around Howard Dean's campaign 4 years before and saw that campaign as an opportunity to reintroduce organizing. And we did, and it worked. And we had 1.5 million people when Obama won. Unfortunately, Obama, during the campaign, he was trying to maximize support. Once he was elected, he was trying to minimize opposition. Very different strategy, very different strategy. And from my perspective, a tragic one, because an opportunity to remake our economy, which was there at that moment because the market crash was blown. And I think that's, frankly, one of the reasons we're in the situation we're in now. So on the one hand, I think we developed a lot of civic capacity that wasn't there, and people continued to build on that. But we hadn't crafted it into the kind of powerful enough organization that could hold the candidate we had elected accountable.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So you already mentioned the situation that we are in right now. So this is a very big question, but when you look at the political situation in the US right now, where is the the way in for organizing change?
Yeah, that's a good question, okay? Yeah. Now, if I had the answer, it would be an airport book and I'd be making a lot of money. No. No, I think it's important to see what it is. And I think the first thing is to recognize that when it comes to democracy in the US, we're at a rock bottom moment. You know about rock bottom moments? Rock bottom moments mean what you've been doing just isn't working. And so you can't just keep doing that. You need to find a different way. And so in a sense, a rock bottom moment, while it's full of suffering, also can be a pathway to change, to something different. It's also a moment that is very, well, my friend Tom Hayden used to say, change is slow except when it's fast. It's also a very fast moment. And so there's all this uncertainty and all this anxiety and fear. Well, and so the question is, how do you deal with that? Under these circumstances, I think optimism and pessimism are both arrogant. Hey, everything's going to be all right. How do you know? Everything's going to go to hell. How do you know? See, hope is realistic. And what I mean is the 12th century philosopher Maimonides had an understanding of hope as belief in the plausibility of the possible as opposed to the necessity of the probable. In other words, it is always probable Goliath will win, but sometimes David does. It was improbable we'd elect a black man president of my country in 2007, and it happened. In other words, hope occupies the space between fantasy and certainty. It's the domain of could be. And sometimes we make the mistake of looking for it out there, like who is the great hero that will free us? Or what is the 10-year plan that will be perfect? But we're looking in the wrong place. I mean, how many folks here have had an experience of hurt? Have you had an experience of hurt? Like if you're on this planet? Like, yeah. What about experience of hope? You ever have that? See, if you hadn't had the experience of hurt, you wouldn't think the world needed fixing. If you hadn't had experience of hope, you wouldn't be here. And sometimes we look for out there for what's in here. And the most important thing in times like these is to connect with each other in order to enrich our capacity for hopeful imagination so we can do the creative work to respond to this crisis in which we find ourselves. And it's not an easy thing, obviously. In some ways, it's like chickens coming home to roost. You know the expression, chickens coming home to roost? You know, you put those chickens out there and then sooner or later they come back. And in our case, one is about the fact that, well, one is about what we've done to our electoral process. We turn it into marketing. That's one big problem. The other is that our Constitution is not a democratic Constitution. It's an oligarchical one, because there's been two political orientations in our history. One is about the governed should govern, that individuals should have voice in their governance. The other is that some people are meant to give orders and others are meant to obey. That is also deep within our history. And we have both systems competing ever since we became a country. One result is that our Constitution was designed so as to protect that. And so we have things like the Electoral College. Nothing representative about that at all. We have a national campaign that occurs in 6 states, only among the people that are sort of undecided. We have a Senate in which California gets 2 votes and Wyoming gets 2 votes. There's no representative democracy in that. And so it stifles so much when you try to move. In our history, then, social movements had a particularly important role because they've been able to mobilize enough and organize enough to put pressure on parties in order to have impact on our politics, like the civil rights movement or the women's movement or suffrage movement, labor movement, and so forth. So these chickens come home to roost. Our system is designed that a minority can take power. And that's what's happening. And then that's part of it. And it works to check change rather than to facilitate it. It's also a presidential system, and I don't want to go off in political science, but I was in the UK, and we met with a number of the new MPs in the Labour Party there. And, you know, they, you could run for a seat with $20,000. In the US, you couldn't get a parking place for $20,000. You know, you're talking $2 to $3 million. So they've converged. So Trump is not some new thing. There have been Trumps throughout our history in one form or another. And so when people say, oh my God, you know, it dropped out of the sky or came out of the ground or wherever he came from, I don't know, that probably more likely the second than the first. But no, but it's not such a thing. And I think the real nailer was that since the 1970s, we've developed a politics of what Thomas Piketty describes a Brahmin left, a highly educated left, so-called left, that abandons its commitment to egalitarian realities, to the lives of ordinary people. And what Piketty points out is, well, then what that does is create a constituency for what he calls the merchant right, who will say, well, look, at least you're white. And so now you've got some identity in lieu of well-being. And that's been a long story in our country. And so the tragedy is that when you mobilize out of fear, which is what Trump's been doing, you're saying, I see you. I see your pain. I see your hurt. I see that nobody sees you. I see you. But you know what? It's not your fault. It's the fault of those migrants. It's the fault of those elites. It's their fault. So let's get together and hate on them, and you can take meaning from me as your sort of avatar, and there you get Trump. You also get the fascist movements in this continent of the 20s and 30s. It's a very similar kind of deal. So what I mean is the Democratic Party abandoned its commitments to the lives, the everyday lives of people and what they need. In this Harris campaign, economic inequality was not even mentioned, you know? Joy was mentioned more. And I got nothing against joy, but, you know, there's reality. And I went to, at Harvard, after the general election, we get the campaign management from both campaigns together in a room for a day and a half, which is kind of an interesting thing. So we had the Trump people and the Harris people. And I came out of that with the clear understanding what the Harris campaign had been trying to do was tell people how they ought to feel rather than listening to how they felt. And you get that distance. And so then on the one hand, you have this fear story. And on the other hand, you got nothing. You're just saying status quo. And see, that I think is a general problem of the progressive world, is what's our story? Where are we going? And sometimes we get stuck, I guess, with something like Trump, you can acquiesce, which some of our institutions have been doing. You can try to check out. You can resist, and the trouble I have with resistance is that you've defined everything by what you're against. There is nothing that you're for, and you're really letting the other side define the whole thing. And so the work, in order to build, you have to fight, but in order to build, you have to know what you're fighting for, and you have to engage with people in their real lives. Our Democratic Party hadn't done that for a long time.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we will zoom out again a little later, but I'd first like to invite my next guest to the table, Jerry Afriye. And Marshall Ganz once wrote a book that's called Why David Sometimes Wins. Well, I think it's safe to say that Jerry Afriye is the David of the Netherlands, because together with the group Kick Out Zwarte Piet, he managed to make the impossible happen in a shorter amount of time than 50 years. He managed to get Black Pete from a completely a Dutch blackface tradition that was
No,
tied
I'm
to the
familiar with
holiday
that. Yeah,
traditions.
yeah.
Yes, from completely acceptable and not thought about by a lot of people to basically unacceptable. And he's here to talk about changing people's minds and touching people's hearts. He also founded the movements Nederland wordt beter and the Soul Rebel movement. Can I have a warm applause? I want you to talk to each other, so please ignore. Talk to each other, yes.
Be close to the mic.
Be close to the mic.
Yeah.
That as well.
I definitely don't want to be shouted at. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So Sandra asked us in the beginning the question, like, how do we encourage courage? And maybe you've been listening to Marshall as well. Can you share a little bit about the moment that you really were encouraged to step up and to take change, to make change?
First of all, really honored to be sitting here at this table with you, and thanks for sharing your journey with us and making us part of your journey, ongoing journey. This country is kind of nice, you know, when it got its behavior together. And I must say that everything I do in this country, some people think that I'm doing it out of hatred, but I think that what we are doing is to show this country that it has so much more to offer than it has set it for. As for me, my drive comes from injustice. It just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't sit right. And I've seen people in many phases of our lives, and I must say that I've never seen the moment that I've seen us in our most brightest, happiest place are those moments that we were not being harmful towards one another. Were those moments that we connect, that we harmonize with one another. So my strive is to kind of enrich that moment. And for me, growing up in a household, I was born in Ghana and my parents separated. So I had to move in and live with my father, which was going to another continent. But before I came here at the age of 11, I already had this a fight in me to fight two forms of injustice. The first was women's rights. I was raised by only a household full of women. I was their first man, they used to say. And I saw how their husbands used to treat them. And I saw how the world used to treat them. And I couldn't understand, because to me, it was equally. But also poverty, looking around me, children who were going through some harsh realities. And I felt like something needed to be done. I didn't know what needed to be done. Just like other people don't know what to do with Trump right now. So, but when I came here, I found myself in an even more greater place of injustice, which was institutionalized racism. And I started learning about the history. And for me, so it was kind of like something that I felt like something needed to be done, because I was in shock and surprised that so many great people being before me and others who have fought against the same thing that we are perceiving, the mistreatment and everything, and it felt like we kind of never move an inch further. So I felt like, okay, how is it possible that we have had greater minds, stronger fighters, fearful fighters, great opposition to injustice, and we are still here. We are still nowhere near. And that's what I felt like something needed to be done. And that's what kind of made sure that I'm going to participate in a movement that will definitely make sure that we move an inch further to the future.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit about the moment that you, were you thinking out of a strategy, or how did you start?
There was no strategy. We just started. When you are mad, you just go for something. And I think that in 2010, a group of people came together, and we felt like, okay, something needs to be done against institutional racism in the Netherlands. And let's start with the most obvious, the one on the faces of people, and that was blackface. Because I always feel like if you cannot recognize the racism on your face, how do you recognize the racism behind closed doors? So I really felt strongly that we need to attack that one. And when we came together, we kind of like, we hoped that people like Oprah Winfrey would say something about it. Power, like to listening to power, I guess. And for us to really think through strategy, it wasn't a big strategy, but it was like, okay, we decided that we were not going to approach the media. The media was not going to be, we didn't care about the media, and we didn't care about politics. And the reason was that we have already saw the generations before us traveling that road without any successful ends. So we felt like, okay, we need to get as many people as possible on our side. And that's why we started going into the streets with our T-shirt as Black Peter's Racism. And when we hit the streets, we start talking with people. Actually, they came to talk with us. Prior to that, you couldn't talk with white people about Swart Piet racism because they would just walk through you. But when they saw that, they got so mad, they came to kind of like insult us. And a lot of them returned being ally because we would let them go through the whole insulting, and when they were done, we would just tap in and be like, you said it and this, but did you know it's differently? Oh, you said that everyone likes it, but if everyone likes it, why would we stand here in this heat? We start in the summer and everything. So why would we do that? You think we don't have something better to do? So we kind of have a conversation, and afterwards they be like, oh, I haven't thought of it this way. Wow, I didn't know this happened. And for me, that was the first moment that I realized, that we can really get far with this movement.
Yeah, because Marshall, what you write and you speak about the question you should ask yourself is the first question you should ask yourself is, who are my people? What do you mean with that?
Well, it's thinking about organizing as a form of leadership. And leadership understood as accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. So it's leadership as a practice, not a position, a way of doing, a form of doing. Because when I say leadership, people may think of positions, but unfortunately, we know of a lot of positions that have people in them, leadership positions, turn out to be awful leaders. I don't know if you have any examples here. I got a few I can share. On the other hand, we meet people in neighborhoods, in workplaces, in communities that are doing that kind of work, enabling others to achieve shared purpose without the titles and all the rest of it. Now, organizing, for me, then, is a particular form of leadership. And the first question is not what's my issue, but who are my people? With whom am I entering into this relationship called organizing? And it is different than thinking of people as clients or customers. It's recognizing people as capable of becoming a constituency, which from the Latin constare means to stand together. It's to break the barrier between beneficiary and benefactor and put both together so that the same people with the challenge become the source of the power to fix it. And that's central to the whole thing. It also means understanding change, not just in your terms, but in terms of people as they experience it. And that's the opposite of what the Harris campaign was doing, as an example. And then finally, it's how they can work together to create the power to create that change. So I think this question of who are my people, the reason for me that's important is that too often when we say, what's my issue, we get the tree people and the fish people. Now, I care about trees. You care about fish. Well, we can't work together because it's fish or it's trees, right? and we're competing for funding from the same donor, and I got to convince them it's all about trees, not fish. We allow ourselves to be defined by an issue rather than by our humanity. And when that happens, it creates all this fragmentation. It exaggerates, because what we've lost is the fact that we all care, we have reverence for the natural world. That's why we care about fish and trees. So why can't we recognize our shared values and be strategic about whether we're going to go after trees or fish, rather than letting ourselves define that way? What I'm hearing, Jerry, is that as a sense of people being not a particular category of people, but the broader humanity in people that can be reached, can be engaged. I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you know, Gandhi, with nonviolence, it's a terrible translation, nonviolence, because the word was satyagraha, and that means truth, force. And it was never non-anything. And when I was trained in it, you don't say, don't do this, don't do this. No, you say, do this. And so the creativity involved in being able, Gandhi called it moral jujitsu, leverage your opponent's values on your opponent, can be extraordinarily powerful. And I think that's what you demonstrated.
Yeah, for me, is that at the end of the day, we have to live together. And I feel like, you know, if we can't live together, let's be able to live peaceful next to each other. And I do think that for me, it's always reaching out to the humanity in the other person. So in my approach, I always approach people how I want to be approached in the same condition. So if, let's say, I'm doing something that is wrong, I want to be approached a certain way. I want to be corrected but not disrespected. So when I'm approaching other people who are doing wrong, I don't want to disrespect them, but I will definitely go for what I think need to be corrected. And I think that it's because, otherwise there's inconsistency there. For me, or even treating family members differently than the person I don't know. You know, if I feel like I have someone in my family being, for example, homophobic, you know, and I know a person I don't know also being homophobic, my approach is going to be the same. It doesn't matter that I know you. It doesn't matter that you are my mom's. It doesn't matter that you help me, you know, through difficult times. I think that if we can be more consistent like that, I think that it will. I do think that our progress will be much greater, because at the end of the day, the demon we are fighting is not only there; it's also within us, amongst us.
Yes. Amen. No, really, yes, I heard that. I think, you know, how can I put this? I was working with some students, and we were talking about identity. And at one point, students said, I got my eye on you there. Okay, yeah, no. At one point, this student said, I see, I don't have a label, I have a story. And for me, that was really critical, because we tend to label others, and then we reduce another person to a label, you know, to all this, all that. Those are dehumanized. It's a process of dehumanization to reduce a person to a label. Why would you let yourself be labeled? Because we're human beings, we're full. We have our identities, our stories, are who we are and who we can become, and being present to one another in that way is so different from like one category bouncing up another category. And this is what in my words, what I'm hearing is about being present to another person as another person, with all that brings with it, as opposed to categorizing that person as a this, as a that, or as the other, which then distances them and creates boundaries between us rather than bridges. Which is not to say that structural differences are huge, but when we turn that into a reduction of another human being to a category, then we are absolutely complicit.
I also think that it is much easier to destroy than to rebuild.
Right.
And I do think that how do we make sure that we don't become what we are fighting? Because we are fighting something that is destroying something. And for me, it's much easier to burn this house down. I don't even need a strategy. Just go for it, you know. But at the same time, so I always feel like you have two choices, revenge or justice. And I think that justice cannot be only done by you. It should be done by everyone. So for me, is that those are the two sides that I see. And I've been many times tested whether to be revengeful or to go for justice. For me, is that this house, when it's all said and done, we still got to live under this roof together. And for us to be able to live together and pass whatever struggle we have to go through, there has to be a sense of us, a sense of this belonging to all of us. And I'm not saying that this should only belong to people who think certain way or act certain way or wear certain color. All I'm saying is that whatever the future may bring, I want it to be a future that my children doesn't have to be facing justice based because they have this beautiful skin color that I have. That's not the reason. And so me, it's more about, it should be about my behavior. And so going through it, but I have all the reason as a black person in this world, in this country, to be mad, to be want to destroy something. So I would never want to take away people's anger, but I'm just looking further, like the next generations, what do they hope to gain from all of this? And I think that they want to gain a place that is much better than what we have now. And I think if we want to encourage them to do better amongst themselves, it's for us to now set the tone for the future.
Yeah. You say, I want to live together in this house in the future. And that is obviously with the society as a whole, but also within the movement. And I also want to talk a little bit about the toll it can take to have a leadership position and to organize. And Marshall, you have said you've said that we also should take the success of a campaign of organizing, we should also judge it by the dynamic within the organizing group, right?
Yeah.
Why is that so important?
Well, it's interesting. We had a session earlier today with some folks in the organizing world. There's a saying in Spanish to be careful. Well, it's called iluminación en la calle y oscuridad en la casa. It means being a light, trying to be a light to the world, but darkness at home. I think in these organizing projects, it starts with how we engage with each other. Sometimes we say, well, you know, we're fighting in the steppe, but we're going out there and saying solidarity forever. Well, we practice it. We have to practice it. That's why practices are such a core way of thinking about these things, as opposed to models and things like that. Because that's what people pay attention to, is a practice. And it's how we can learn if we've built learning into the practice. In other words, that it's not like we're doing this stuff and then we go off on a retreat and we learn. It's built into the thing as just part of what we do, especially in times that are like this, that are so critical that way. But I think the broader point is that unless we're practicing what we're talking about, well, then we're not doing it. I've been doing some work recently with the Girl Scouts, okay? Girl Scouts, really? Yes, the Girl Scouts, and not just cookies, but no. But it's interesting because they are a self-governing organization in which they pay for their dues, they elect their leadership, and they're committed to equipping young women and girls with the capacity for democratic citizenship and leadership. And they realize that if that's what they're trying to do, and they run like an NGO, well, they're not doing that. And so they need to be what they are trying to be. They were getting a lot of pressure to turn into more of an NGO, But they resist that, and that's how we began working with them to try to facilitate their governance process. What I'm trying to say is, it's what we do, and that's what speaks. But that's also where the learning has to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you recognize that? So, the toll it can take on being an activist, and how you organize it in such a way that people are not destroyed by it?
Usually when I answer this question, people get mad at me. For me, it's all about the goal. You asked previously what was our strategy and everything. We decided that within 15 years, all of us were in our 20s. Within 15 years, we want to make remarkable changes that this country can never deny her colonial and slavery past, but also that we're still dealing with the consequence of institutional racism in this country. And we said it's going to happen in 15 years. We were laughed at. People were like, it's never going to happen. And especially not the way you want to do it, talking with people. How is that going to solve anything? And yet we proved them wrong. But I do think that it came with a price. And more than anyone, I was willing to pay the price, because I felt like those before me, I asked them what happened, why it didn't happen, why are we here still dealing with something from yesterday? And some will say, yeah, we had to deal with repression from the government. Some will say, I had children and I had to take care of them. Some will say, I found a job, I got a job. There were all type of reasoning. And I found it reasonable, but it didn't get us where we should be. So for me, when we started this, I was like, anything that comes my way, I'm gonna take it. So when I lost my job, I didn't thought for a second, when the government took away my job, I didn't thought for a second, okay, maybe I should stop now, because I do know that in history, especially black people, when we stand up, there's always gonna be an example to make out of those people are looking up to. So for me, I felt like, okay, now I gotta continue. And also the times that, all the police beatings and all those things that I had to endure, it didn't stop me anything. It kind of, empowered me, because I knew if I get past this, we might see a next step. And so, and there are people, I feel like, they feel like, no, we shouldn't move too soon or too fast, or we shouldn't take certain risks. And I understand, and if I have a choice between playing it safe and making progress, there's no way I would say, well, give me violence. But I felt like that if we want to make progress, we had to go through some pain. And I think that you have to be courageous. When we started this movement, there was only 3 of us. And our first protest, there was only 2 of us. And opposite of us, there were thousands of people who came to celebrate blackface, and we were standing, the 2 of us, with critical message towards them. But I think that those people who lead the movement especially have to be courageous. And I think that what we're seeing in politics today is that they are too afraid to be courageous. They are too afraid to stand for something. And that's why they are losing votes, and they are saying, we don't care about politics. No, they don't care about people. That's why we are not voting.
Flash?
Sorry.
Yeah, so it really was your life for a long time, and at great personal costs. So how do we broaden that, I guess, lower the threshold for people to join? Because there are very courageous leaders, but how do we broaden that circle?
I don't know. From my own experience, it's there's a couple things. One is what are people experiencing that hurts? But the other is, where can some hope come from? In other words, if it's all one way, people say, oh, it's going to get so bad, people will fight back. It doesn't work like that, unless there's sources of hope. So how to cultivate those two how to cultivate the second, I think, is really important. One of the most important sources of hope can be each other, which is why supporting one another, that's why that's so important. It's also experience. In community organizing, sometimes people make fun of the fact that it may start with trying to get a stop sign where there was no stop sign. You say, oh, that's trivial. Well, it's not if you've never had an experience of efficacy. And you have an experience of efficacy because that stop sign got put there. Now, what that means, that opens up possibility, because people gain strength through experience. It's not just a bunch of words. And that's what I'm seeing and hearing, is you have to find those sources of courage and risk-taking. You can't protect, how can I say, when I got involved in civil rights, I wasn't feeling sorry for anybody. In fact, the first staff meeting I went to, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was who I was working with. And the first one I went to, I thought there'd be courageous young people who were leading this thing. And I thought there'd be signs and charts and all over. They were having a preach-off. What's a preach-off? Who could imitate Dr. King better? In other words, here were these young people fighting this injustice, but courageous as hell and celebrating and finding humor in the struggle. Now, how could you not want to support that? How could you not want to be part? Yes, they were risking their lives. Yes, all that. But they were also walking the walk in a way that was deeply real and teaching. So, you know, there is no, you don't change the status quo without finding ways to withdraw enough from it that you're not totally dependent upon it. And that's sacrifice. You know, and sacrifice is, and it's not just the leaders that sacrifice. I mean, people in social movements, they sacrifice. And sometimes people will say, well, it's too late for me, but not for my children. And so I'm doing this for them. But this idea that change and growth is sacrifice-free is nonsense. It's just nonsense. You know, when people think, oh, let me go get a grant, and then when I get the grant, I'll start my movement. It doesn't work like that. And when the grant's over, the movement's over. I mean, it's the opposite. It's finding people who will share your commitment deeply enough. I mean, one of the most instructive moments I had in the farm workers was when, in our movement, there was a lot of push toward violence. A lot of like, let's burn down the packing sheds, let's do all that. This was in 1968. And so Cesar called a meeting, Cesar Chavez called a meeting with us, and he announced that he hadn't eaten for 10 days and he wasn't going to eat. He was going to fast. And he was going to fast as long as he was going to fast. Now, Gandhi distinguished between a hunger strike and a fast. A hunger strike, Gandhi said, you never want to put your life in the hands of your opponent. Why would you do that? A fast is to your own people. It's about commitment. It's about renewing the commitment. It's about understanding the necessity of sacrifice in order to move forward, make progress. His fast went on for 28 days. And it was one of the most profound experiences any of us had who were part of that, because it was like looking into yourself and saying, okay, that's what this costs. And, you know, it ended when, well, Bobby Kennedy came to share, to offer communion host to Cesar when he broke the fast. But it was a transformation in our movement, because it renewed the whole thing. And it wasn't kidding. But see, we're capable of that. Humans are capable of that kind of sacrifice and that kind of risk-taking. And when we try to protect people from it, I think we're missing the whole point. I hope that makes sense. It's just, yeah.
I just want to add that for me, it's not about how big your contribution is, because I think that all contributions are important. And so therefore, you have to look within yourself, what can you handle? For me, I could handle more than if I had a choice, I would have chosen to handle. But I feel like sometimes people think, okay, I got to do massive thing. I have to start from big, because that is starting at the end of a movement. The beginning of a movement is very small. Martin Luther King was just a preacher. Look where it got him. You know, so you could say, no, I don't want to be a preacher. How is that going to help? You know, you could say like, oh, I don't want to be a lawyer. You know, look at where Nelson Mandela got. So you don't know where you will get. Malcolm X started just, we all know, he started from the streets. So it's not about how big your contribution is, but I feel like you have to choose something that you can handle. Because I'd rather you choose something very small and finish it than to choose something big and not finish it. Because you would disappoint the people who depended on you for you to finish it. And that's what I've learned along the way, how important that is, that it's not a competition. Who got the bigger pie? It's not a pie, it's pain that you are sharing.
Thank you. I want to ask the last speaker and the next generation to the table. And she's someone who's very much dealing with this question of how much sacrifice can we ask from people and from society as a whole. It's Diewertje Wallaert. She's the chair of the Jonge Klimaatbeweging, a youth organization that represents the voices of young people in the climate debate. And she tries to build bridges between young people and climate politics. Can I have an applause for Diewertje?
Hi.
Hi, thank you for joining us. Yeah, so climate change, it's a huge area. And the Jonge Klimaatbeweging is an organization. Can you tell us a little bit of where you want to make the change?
Yeah, so we are a youth organization, volunteer organization, and we work with young people to bring a voice to our generation within the climate debate. It's an organization that is very much focused on targeting policymakers, politicians, our government, because we really want to get a seat at the table. And we try to push for a systemic change instead of just focusing on what people should do, change in their own lives to work on a better climate, because we really believe that there's a responsibility within our governments to take care of that.
Yeah, and we've invited you here because you took a course with Marshall.
I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of lessons you are trying to implement in your organization?
Yeah, so maybe it's a fun story to tell is how I got to take that course from Marshall, because I heard from it the first time because my dad actually took the course, and he was really enthusiastic about it, and I was 19, and it's like every proper 19-year-old, I was really skeptic about it because, my dad likes this stuff, sure. Sounds good, Dad, you do you, go to your Zoom calls. But then we took a trip to the States, which was a really huge privilege for our family. And we got to travel around for a bit. And then we went to Boston, and me and my dad were together. And he was like, we're going to meet up with my professor. And I was like, okay, sounds cool. Like, I was pretty politically engaged, so I liked the idea. And then Marshall... he was like, we were just gonna go by his office, maybe see the campus. And then Marshall actually took the time to have dinner with us for like over 5 hours. And we got to have this amazing conversation. And the funny thing is, I'm sorry, Dad, but I kind of stole that conversation away with him, because Marshall was really like asking me so many questions about, because I was already involved in my organization, but I wasn't really in a leadership position yet. And he was like, why? Why are you not? And why do you care? And what can you do? What else can you do? And that really inspired me to become a board member of my organization and take on the leadership role, and also take the course, because that course that I used to be really skeptical about, then I was like, maybe this guy has a point, and maybe my dad also has a point. So there you go, Dad.
Great.
So I took the course, and then I started learning about organizing and about the way you can take the resources of your people and turn it into power, but also that is a process that is not only about power and politics and about about framing and policy, but it's so much about people and joy and connection and having fun with your friends. And that was something I really wanted to take into a higher level at my organization and really wanted to implement. So yeah, I think when talking about what I learned in that course, it was to just always embrace the people and have joy with it, and the best plans and the most fun can be had in conversations we have over beers after the official board meeting. So that is a lesson I really try to implement there.
Yeah, great. And you also brought a dilemma, because it's one of the things that you've learned from Marshall. Mm-hmm. And it's like the master's tools can bring down the master's house.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite classes we had. Every week we had a lecture by Marshall, and it was one of the quotes that really stuck with me, because the master's tools can change the master's house, but as a young youth, as a young generation, we've never even had the opportunity to hold the master's tools.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what it means?
Yeah, so to me it kind of means like...
And you can check whether she...
No,
Yeah.
Audrey Lorde is listening. Yeah.
We have people that are in power, and they maintain that power with certain tools. And those tools are often inaccessible to a lot of people that they hold the power over. And you see a lot of movements trying to really make those tools for themselves, and then they become accessible, but then they also kind of lose a connection with the people that they might have once started from. So it's a big dilemma I'm facing, because in my organization, we also kind of try to take the master's tools, try to do the same thing that I've been warned.
Try to speak with the minister.
We engage directly with policy. We dress up in their suits and we go to their meetings and we have the conversation with the minister, and she nods her head and she says, "Yeah, I really believe in youth voices." And then there's still no policy that's gonna fix the climate crisis for us. So what the hell is going wrong here? And then we go to our parliament and we offer them a lot of solutions that have a really big draagvlak, I don't know how to, like, they're very supported by youth, by us, and we show them that support, and then they're like, "Oh, this is amazing, guys," and then there's still not enough policy to fix climate change. So at one hand, I see that it doesn't always work just using the master's tools, but at the same time, I struggle, because what is the alternative? Like, I haven't always found it yet, and I do still believe in that democratic process, and that maybe if we get that seat at the table and build it out and work on it, then it might become better. But yeah, how do we define that line between actually having a seat at the table and just youth washing and being like told you're great, but still not seeing the change that you are fighting for?
Do you want to? It looked like you wanted to say something.
No, I'm just listening, and yeah, I think both. It's actually like sometimes you gotta be opportunistic. You know, you have to see when to seize the moment. I felt like when 2020 we started those demonstrations, Black Lives Matter demonstrations in the Netherlands, what we organized.
Yesterday it was 5 years ago.
It was 5 years ago.
George Floyd was murdered.
Actually, George Floyd was killed 5 years ago, and but coming Sunday is 5 years ago that we started the demonstrations in the Netherlands. And actually, when we did it, a lot of people were pessimistic about it, like how it's gonna help. Actually, people start putting up a black square on the internet. But for me, I feel like, you know, that we seize the moment. And coming Sunday, we're going to explain how we seize the moment. And the reason that I thought I just embraced those people who came outside. While a lot of my peers were like, "Where were you all this time? Now all of a sudden you want to show your face. You need to do some learning, etc." I was like, I'm happy you came. Let's get the job done. This is how you can help. And also using the numbers, because we went to talk with Prime Minister Rutte. He's, how to explain him? He is one of our uncles. And what actually happened is that we talked with the Prime Minister, and we know that a lot of people talk with the Prime Minister, but they don't get far. What we did is, when we talked with him, before we went to talk with him, we went around the country and we collected input from black communities around the country. And we wrote a manifesto called Black Manifesto, and we put it in place. So what happened is that we got to know different branches of the government to speak about those manifestos. Because I do know that the government employees, the branches, they stay, but the ministers, they don't. So you can use politics, you can use all those things, but you must always hold on to the ability of your own tools as well. So I always see the tool of the master's house as a plus, but it's not the one that you need. That alone cannot help you, because I do know that when we fight racism, we are talking to the whole country. That is the difficult part of fighting for black emancipation. Every person who's part of the dominant group have to change their attitude for us to make progress. So the lawyer, the judge, the politician, all those people cannot remove themselves from becoming part of the solution. You cannot say, oh, it's their fault, or you need to be with them. No. Everyone has to change their attitude from very small to the oldest in the room of the dominant group. So I do think that you can use the master's tools when it's convenient, but always hold on to your own tools. And our tools was civil disobedience when it was needed.
Yeah, David and Goliath. Yeah. I mean, that's a classic story about this, because folks familiar with the story, there was this guy, Goliath, who was the champion of the Philistines, and he was coming out to challenge the Israelites. I'm a big, powerful warrior, and so have your champion face me, and we'll go at it mano a mano, and if we win, you're ours, but if you win, we're yours. Nobody responds. I don't know, people have to clean their rooms or look at their feet or whatever, but nobody, and he's coming out day after day doing this kind of challenging. Well, and everybody's afraid. Well, one day, a guy named Jesse sends his youngest son, who's a shepherd, David, to take food to his brothers, who are warriors, but he's not. And so he arrives, and then Goliath comes out, and he starts doing his yo mamas, or whatever you want to call what he was doing. And David is outraged, like this is an insult to the ranks of the living God. How can his brothers are saying, hey, cool it, just don't be a protruding nail, just keep quiet. He says, no, I insist. So he goes to face King Saul, the king, and he says, King Saul, I'm ready to fight Goliath. He says, come on, it's a joke. You're but a youth. He's been a warrior since his youth. He says, yeah, but I'm all you got. Okay. He says, okay, but here's the deal. Take my sword, take my shield, take my helmet. You're going to need these, because he's a powerful warrior. Well, David takes them, and he puts them on. And they're so heavy he can't move. And that's when he looks down and he sees 5 small stones in a little wadi. He says, wait a second. As a shepherd, I knew how to protect my flock from the wolf and the bear. It wasn't with a sword and a shield. It was with a little stone and a sling. Maybe Goliath's just another wolf, just another bear. So at that point, he gets rid of all that stuff, picks up the stones, goes to face Goliath, who starts laughing. Am I a dog that you send a boy, ha, ha, ha? In the middle of the third ha, he gets a stone in the forehead, and that's the end of Goliath. Now, it's not a nonviolent story, okay? But it is a story about the relationship of commitment and strategy and recognizing your tools and their tools. And to me, it makes the point that you start with what you can, what you have. He was a shepherd. Trying to be a warrior was not going to get him anywhere. And I think so often that's what we get the advice. You want to fight them, you need more money. You want to out-lobby them, it's all sort of like, it is really, literally, almost trying to use the master's tools. But you've got to find your own tools. I mean, it seems to me that's what you all did, is you found your own ways to make the point, to assert. And I think that's where there's a real truth in that. Now, what does that mean in practice? Well, that's where it takes some real work. I mean, real imagination, I think. You know, the climate thing, I mean, it's real. It's coming our way. I mean, you know, this stuff we're doing, it's not working. And we need to actually confront that reality and look to each other as ways in which we can draw on our humanity to deal with this challenge. But how does it become real? Urgency. Well, it's been hard for that movement to create a sense of urgency. Now, in Los Angeles, when the fires were going on, there was some urgency. Or the floods, or Pakistan, or here, or there. These are very real things. And so the question is, how do we confront ourselves and others with these realities? Because they're not abstractions, they're not myths, it's what's happening. And it's tricky too, because then people say, well, you're all gloom and doom. Well, gloom and doom. Well, at least it's better than parts per million. I mean, that was the whole, you know, what the climate movement was speaking for so long. Nobody could understand that. So this challenge of how we make these things that are very big, real things, real to people, that's, I think, crucial. And I don't think you get that by out-marketing the oil companies. I think you get it by going underneath the oil companies and building enough power to stop them, whether it's political, whether it's economic, through civil disobedience, whatever. But I don't know, I didn't mean to get off on that, but I have a colleague who started a new class at Harvard this year called Reweaving Ourselves and Our World. And it was sort of saying, let's confront, well, actually, there's a book she assigns. I don't want to get off on this, but it's a book called Hospicing Modernity. And it's sort of saying, look, the system's not working. We have to find a fresh system. And, you know, that sounds very grandiose and all that, but I don't think it's found in grandiose ways. I think it's found in specific ways, in concrete ways. But I think we need to know what we're trying to do and just how real this stuff is.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
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 Do you have any we're almost running out of time, but a small suggestion of what of the small tools that you think the climate movement is working with?
What we are currently, or
when you are David.
When we're David.
What are your tools if
I
you don't want to use the sword?
One of the powers we have as a climate movement is everybody cares. Like, there's not a lot of people who are going to be out here going to be like, yeah, fuck the future, we don't care, we will just destroy the planet and pass it on, like, burnt down to our children. Like, if you are able to connect that doom and gloom that might be necessary, I sometimes struggle, like, do we need to tell a positive or a depressing story? Like, it's a balance, I think, because you also need to have that hope and also need to show, like, this is what can be done to change. But if we are really able to get that sense of being a good predecessor that is so innately inherent to a lot of humans, I think, then we can really, like, utilize that to create massive change, like global. So I think really working on our story of self should be like primordial, like one of our primary strategies. And then also you see every single strategy that we talk about is being used, I think, in some shape or form in the climate movement. So economic, political, and civil disobedience. But I think it's still difficult to really capture that, like make it together and bring it together. And it's going to be a constant fight and constant work, but yeah, I think just keep telling the story and keep bringing people into the movement, and then, you know, eventually I do have to believe that change will come. So keeping that belief is also, I think, a part of the strategy.
Thank you. I think it's time for questions from the audience. Are there people with questions? Yes. I'll keep it moving.
Thank you all very much. It was very enlightening. I have a question for Marshall Ganz. The Christian societies are really very strong and becoming much more strong nowadays. They influence our world very efficiently through social media and through lots of channels I don't know about. And they influence parts that we thought here in Europe, in Holland, were already fights that we already had won, female of abortion rights, and lots of other female aspects of female rights, women rights. I mean, can you think that, because then the Christian societies are really very strong. They have a lot of community sense, so they feel together. And that is exactly what you, what your theory is about how to create a strong movement. So how could we possibly create a movement that is equally as strong as these Christian societies?
As which societies?
Christian.
Christian.
I don't quite understand.
I think the question is that there has been lots of fights that we thought in the Netherlands were won, like abortion rights and women's rights, are now perhaps back on the discussion table under influence of Christian societal, organizational values, if I paraphrase correctly.
Yeah.
So how can we appeal to the belonging that is apparent in Christian faith?
Well, I don't want to speak as an authority on Christianity, okay? I mean, let me off of that. And I'm not sure that it's Christian groups that are really responsible for all this. You know, there's a very good story about, I'm blanking on her name. There was a whole campaign to link the choice fight to the right wing in the US. And it's sort of, how can I say, they've used it, just like today they're weaponizing anti-Semitism and saying it's all about it's not. That's the arrow on a much bigger assault. And so I think if we look at the choice as a matter of Christian theology, I think that maybe that's part of it for some people. But it's a bigger kind of assault on gender, on women, on equality. And I think we have to look at it in those terms. But look, you're better off than we are. I mean, look, we're the warning. I mean, your institutions are better than ours. They're more responsive, they're more proximate, they're more democratic. And, you know, so our Supreme Court threw out Roe, and so then they come. See, these fights are never over. It's like well, a song that I often end with these sessions with is about every generation having to win freedom again. It's just, you know, Bob Dylan had this song called It's All Right, Ma, and it's sort of like if you're busy being born, you're either busy being born or busy dying. And so that's kind of how things work. So I wouldn't want to say that this is all a Christian project, but I would say there is certainly a very powerful reaction to the successes of the women's movement globally. And a lot of that is to push back in any way they can. But the momentum is not running in their direction, it's running in our direction. And I think we need to appreciate that and own that and recognize it and build from it rather than, oh, they're so powerful. They're taking advantage of vacuums that we've created. And just as we've created them, we can take them in a different direction if we get that. You know, I didn't mention Tim Berners-Lee here, did I?
No.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet, thank you. Yeah, Tim Berners-Lee is the guy that invented the World Wide Web. And I was at dinner at MIT where he was talking about, and he was saying that machines can make decisions, but only humans can make choices. His point was that a machine is a calculating device. It's a 0, 1, that's what it is. You can program it, it'll make decisions. But humans are capable of so much more. We learn with our hearts, we learn with our bodies, we learn from our experience, we learn with each other. And we, in fact, are capable of far more than any machine. It's a whole different category, a whole different, and I think we forget that. And we forget that what that means is that we have an ongoing need to create, to develop, to learn, to adapt, and to move forward. And so that they push back, yeah, of course, but that means we have to push forward in a more powerful way. And not just, oh, they've got so much power. Sometimes we attribute too much monolithic power to the opposition and don't appreciate all the fractures over there, because what we ought to be doing is deal with the fractures among us. I don't know if that's a response to the question, but that's about the best I could do.
Yes, I have a question over here.
Wait, now I lost. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for today. I wrote down here in my many notes that you mentioned that the general problem of the progressive world is that we don't have a story.
Yeah.
You mentioned, what is our story?
Yeah.
So then my question to you, maybe it's too broad of a question for now, but what would you say our story should be?
Oh, you're revealing the fact that I've had this secret story and it's been here, and I'm just not going to reveal it till the right moment, and this is the right moment. No, I think narrative grows out of practice. And I mean, you know, a powerful story of us, it's rooted in stories of self. It's rooted in people really engaging with one another, taking the risks, and building the solidarity to then be able to tell that kind of story in a hopeful and real way. You know, we have these message factories in DC that produce messages, and they sort of call them stories. They're not, because stories really come out of lived human experience. Now, movements, one of the things movements do is develop fresh stories. And there's no sort of magic formula. But I think it's recognizing the fact that we need to be able, first of all, to really appreciate and anchor the values that are moving us, why we really care, and do that with each other, and recognize we have to take risks and that there are challenges, and take seriously the question of where do we find the courage, where do we find the solidarity. Out of that, narrative grows. In other words, it's not something just invented over here in a story factory. Yeah, I'm sorry, but that's your job, okay? No, it's a legitimate question. And part of it, when you're so caught up trying to market and do all that marketing stuff, you're sort of very confused about how to even talk to other people. And we talk with each other often through stories. It's a powerful way to, but sort of when we let the powers that be just turn everything into a marketing campaign, it takes the space, it doesn't fill it. I hope this makes some sense.
I was personally really struggling with this as well when I took the course, because especially in climate activism, we really struggle with that story of self. Because me personally, I grew up here in the Netherlands in a privileged home. I have never had to deal with any climate emergencies, never had to deal with heat waves or floods. Like, it has not directly affected my life. I see that it will affect my future, but I don't have a story of how I had to flee from a flood or something. So I actually came to Marshall with this question, like, I've been told to come up with this story of self, but I don't really remember anything bad happening to me, so what should my story be? And then he asked me, like, why do you care? Why do you care? Like, not just, oh, because it's important and because the planet, but what happened to you that made you care? And what is maybe your first memory of ever caring about this issue? And that really made me fundamentally question, like, why do I care? Like, what happened in my life that shaped me that way? And that is a story. And that is always a story. And yeah, it really changed my perspective and helped me, like, because the story is not about having the worst struggle and being like having it really bad. The story is about sharing a value and about making a value something you project into something people understand and live with you. So when you tell, like, why do you care and when did that happen, people will recognize that, and then they will also, like, it will become a part of their DNA on more than just being something they heard once. And that is, I think, the essence of the prize.
Thank you. I have one question here.
Oh, okay. No.
Bye.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question for you, Marshall. So I was thinking, as I see it, as I experience it, old divisive narratives are quite popular from left to right. So in light of democracy, the master's tools and narratives for systemic change, how do we prevent activists and lobbyists from setting the tone?
Good point. How do we? Trying to think the best way to respond. Lobbyists are, well, I don't want to say all lobbyists or whatever, but people are actually starved for authentic communication, for that which is real. And this confusion about, is a story about applying a gloss from the outside or bringing out a glow from the inside. We have pretty good antenna to know when somebody's giving us a line and when they're actually speaking from their heart. And one of the problems that happens with lobbying and all the rest of that is it gets turned into a business. It gets turned into what's branding. It turns into all that. But that's not storytelling. It's trying to come up with ways to elicit responses in a way that is, well, let me give you an example. In the campaign, after Kamala was nominated, the New York Times had an audio recording of a reporter going with an organizer. And they come to this person's house, and woman comes out, the guy says, I'm working for the Harris campaign. You must be really concerned about choice. Climate, education. He starts going down a list of how can you categorize the person. And so the reporter came back later and had a real conversation with the person. And yeah, there was a whole lot going. She had a daughter, she's concerned about her health, the whole thing. But see, too much of the lobbying stuff and that stuff operates the way I was describing. It put people in categories and boxes, or it tries to say, you have to be pragmatic, you know? One of my favorite quotes actually is from the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 10, verse 16. Jesus is about to send his organizers out to tell the news, right? The gospel. And he says, if I'm going to put you as sheep among wolves, you must be innocent as doves and wise as serpents. In other words, we need to understand the world, how it works, recognize it, but recognize it from a perspective of clarity about our own values, what matters and what doesn't. Now, yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that finding the language, the words that are real to communicate, what we really care for, sorry, that's not, how can I say, that's not what lobbyists do. It's a different thing. Now, maybe there are lobbyists who try to do this, but I don't know. I think it comes back to people actually authentically communicating with other people in ways that are real. I don't know if that's a response to your question, but it's just a different mode of communication and engagement.
I heard also, because I think you said lobbyists and activists set the tone.
Oh, activists. Yeah.
Actually, it's always activists who set the tone. It's, I've never seen real changes coming from any other direction. And I think it's unfortunate that in this country we doesn't learn at school, very young age, that activists are the people who paves the way for us to see. So I do think that the lobbyists is another story. Activists doesn't get paid. My whole movement, 15 years of work, it wasn't, we had no employees, just volunteer work. So I do think that activists are actually people just like any other people, but they just care too much to stand by something that we all agree should be changed.
Thank you.
Changes in this country in 35 years. That's why I'm asking. Because activists don't speak for me, but those like-minded, like me.
Let me see if I can just make comment about this. I think
just for the live stream, he said that there wasn't any real change in the last 35 years and activists haven't been speaking for him. A very brief answer, because we are running out of time.
Oh, you've noticed I struggle with brief answers. No, yeah, no, it's very sharp. No, I think I understand a bit about what you're saying. There's a big difference between someone who actually represents a constituency, that they are responsible for other people, that they're not just there because they think it's a great idea, and they too easily get drawn into labels as opposed to depth. And so it happens on the left, actually, quite a bit, is like, I don't represent anybody, but boy, I've got the truth. And so you listen to me because I got the truth. And then over there is somebody, I got the truth. And so then they're arguing about what the truth is, neither one of which is grounded in the reality of human lived experience, but rather in a world of ideas and abstractions which only take us farther away. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, but I have seen how destructive that can be. Now, that's not to say at all, of course, people who step up, who find the courage, that's critically important. So I think putting everybody in one box is not so useful. But I do think I recognize what you're talking about, and it can be very counterproductive. I don't know. That's what I have to say on that.
Great.
Yeah.
And it's been great listening to you. Yeah, I think that's it for tonight. I want to thank so many people. Wallard en Kussen and the Lowlander Project for the great idea of bringing Marshall Ganz here, and my speakers Sandra Bell, Jerry Afrië, and Diewertje Wallard, and of course, most of all, Marshall Ganz. Can I have a warm applause?
Good. Thank you. Thank you.
One last thing.
Yeah, could I just conclude with the song?
Yes.
but I'm not going to sing. In the 4th grade, I was told, please just mouth the words. But I think it touches on a lot of what we've been talking about, and it's a song Judy Collins recorded in the 60s at the time of the Civil Rights Movement. And it uses the word freedom because the Civil Rights Movement never called itself the Civil Rights Movement, it called itself the Freedom Movement. It's a much bigger word, it's a much more powerful word than legal rights. And the song goes, freedom doesn't come like a bird on the wing, doesn't fall down like the summer rain. Freedom's a hard-won thing. You have to work for it, you have to fight for it, day and night for it, and every generation has to win it again. Pass it on to your children, brother, pass it on to your children, sister. They have to work for it. They have to fight for it, day and night for it, and every generation has to win it again. Pass it on to your children, pass it on. And thank you for an opportunity to do some passing of it on.